Hello, I'm Judith Panera, Executive Director of AAMC and AAMC Foundation. It is a pleasure to welcome you to today's program. Thank you for joining us. Our offices are located in New York, and today I'm speaking to you from Brooklyn, location situated upon the unceded seized territory of the Lenape and Canarsie peoples, and benefited from the economies of slavery and the labors of African-descended captives. We owe our existence and vitality to generations from around the world who were brought here against their will, drawn here to escape persecution, and some that have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. We pay respect to their communities past and present. This acknowledgement asks us each to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us here together today. AAMC is dedicated to an environment in which all individuals are treated with respect and dignity at our programs. Each individual has the right to be in a professional atmosphere that prohibits discriminatory practices, including harassment. Our full code of conduct policy for today's program and all our programs, events, and overall work, as well as the outlets to make a direct or anonymous report of a violation, has been posted in our chat feature. We are grateful to our attendees for making space in their schedule to join us. I also want to acknowledge and welcome all our members here today and express our gratitude to them for being part of our community. We give thanks to our speakers for sharing their experiences and knowledge in today's candid and open forum. Please also be sure to check out our YouTube channel to see recordings of past programs as well. Thank you again for joining us. And now to begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Brittany Webb, the Evelyn and Will Kaplan Curator of 20th Century Art and the John Rhoden Collection at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, and I am excited to introduce this exciting panel of curators to talk about uneven or unlevel playing fields with my colleagues Charlotte Flint, Claudia Preza, and Bevin Bradley. Emma, if we could have slides. I thought it would be good if we could start by introducing ourselves. This is a webinar that is going to investigate the unglamorous side of curating, curatorial projects aimed at correcting the unlevel playing field that we all work in, including touching on time, money, people, networks, uneven archival materials, institutional buy-in, education, training, and the challenge of curating with limited resources. We're also going to discuss how lessons from doing projects that are meant to shift the field or correct an absence teach us why these projects happen so infrequently. Can I have the next slide? And I thought we would start by introducing ourselves just so all of our attendees could have a sense of where we're coming from. So my name is Brittany Webb, and I'm the Evelyn and Will Kaplan Curator of 20th Century Art and the John Rhoden Collection at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts in downtown Philadelphia. Next slide. And so PAFA is the oldest museum and art school in the country, founded here in Philadelphia in 1805. And the project that I have opened just recently, October 5th, is called Determined to Be the Sculpture of John Rhoden. And John Rhoden is a 20th century sculptor born in Birmingham, Alabama in 1916. He passed away in 2001. And this project is really the first major comprehensive retrospective exhibition that celebrates this sculptor across approximately 70 sculptures in stone, bronze, and wood, along with archival materials that trace the arc of his life from humble Birmingham beginnings to New York City in the 1930s, traveled all around the world, exhibited everywhere you want to exhibit as a sculptor in the 20th century, and someone who settled in Brooklyn, had an incredibly rich life, and somehow fell out of art history. And so one way that I thought I might introduce myself into this conversation is by talking about the way that this project both introduces a sculptor back into an art history that essentially erased his work and his contributions, and also the behind the scenes work that it took to kind of level that field for him a bit. Next slide. And so one of the things that I think is most exciting to talk about with this project is to show these sort of behind the scenes images. So this is a project I've been working on for 5 years, but this is what it looks like behind the scenes for most of the time that I was working on it. And I'm sure we'll get into this later with my fellow panelists. This is the behind the scenes, unglamorous work that people often don't think about when they're walking through an exhibition. We don't think about what work looks like in storage, the kind of labor and time and research it takes to identify names, dates, and materials for sculptures that came to PAFA essentially before I did, without an illustrated checklist, without an organized archive, what it took to make sure we had proper identification, could process an archive, and could be in a position to even tell this story in an exhibition format. Can I have the next slide? And I'm happy to kick this over to my colleague, Charlotte.
Thank you, Brittany. Hi, everyone. My name's Charlotte Flint, and I've actually recently started a new job. But when I started the AAMC, the fellowship, I was working as an assistant curator at Hayward Gallery Touring, which, although is based in London, we work collaboratively with different arts organisations and places all across the country. So Hayward Gallery Touring is the UK's largest contemporary arts organisation, producing exhibitions that tour across the UK. And we work with a real range of partners, from museums, galleries, artists, curators, designers, writers, and work with different partner institutions across the country. So the shows that I worked on while I was there was the British Art Show 9. This is an exhibition that's hosted every 5 years. It aims to be a snapshot of contemporary art scene at the time. It's about 3 to 4 years in the making. It includes the work of about 48 living artists. On screen here, I've just got a couple of examples of 2 of the artists that I work with. There's Oliver Beer with his Household Gods on the left, which is a series of different objects, each of which have a tiny microphone inside, which are all mic'd up to create this kind of chorus of sounds. And on the right is Ghislaine Lung, which is her work, Violets 2, is actually part of the Turner Prize. And this is a ventilation system that was stripped out of a former venue, and then it's basically repurposed in each venue, and we have to make it as big as possible to fit in each space. So I wanted to show a couple of examples of some of the more challenging works that were included in that exhibition. Next slide, please. And then the other exhibition that I was working on was called Acts of Creation on Art and Motherhood, which is co-curated with the brilliant writer and critic Hetty Judah. And this will be touring to 4 other venues around the UK, opening in March next year. So this will open in the Arnolfini, which is on the top left in Bristol. It will then travel to the Midlands Art Centre in Birmingham, the Millennium Galleries in Sheffield, and Dundee Contemporary Art. So it's going to tour for about a year and a half. So although we're based in London as Hayward Gallery Touring, we work with different places all over the country. So this is just a snapshot of where we'll be working with. And then next slide, please. And then I also have an independent curatorial practice, and this has been something that I've tried to kind of have alongside my institutional work, which gives me the opportunity to do things kind of completely on my own, and to sort of set my own parameters and explore other subjects I might not have the opportunity to. So this is a brilliant American photographer and lesbian activist called T. Corinne, and I'm working on a book which will be published about her next year. And a bit like Brittany was saying with John Rhoden, although there is an archive of her work, it's very, very little known. And actually the very unglamorous digging through archive boxes and looking through kind of, yellowing materials has been a big part of bringing this story to life. So thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Bevin Bradley, and I'm in Saskatoon working at Remai Modern. So Saskatoon is sort of in the western part of Canada, and the town of Saskatoon is about 350,000 people. So the institution, Remai Modern, is fairly new in the last 6 years, and its predecessor, the Mendel Gallery, is sort of building a lot of the collection that we have is from the Mendel Gallery. So I've been involved in working at the institution for over 8 years, but in my current role as assistant curator, I have been here since last year. So it's been an exciting time to be working here because of the kind of the strategic guidelines we're looking at rooted in place and making the gallery and the museum more accessible with still an international focus. So you can go to the next slide and I'll just talk about the building itself, the beauty of it, you know, being a newer structure and creating this like world-class museum with amazing visitation. So we're looking at all kinds of programming that includes people from all walks of life. So the next slide. So one of the projects that I was involved in last year was All Aboard Everyone an Artist, and it was working with a program that we have called the Art for Life program, and it involved 4 different schools from the core neighborhoods and incorporating an artist program guide to work with the schools over a course of 3 years. And then the exhibition was the first of its kind at Remai Modern since opening. So it was allowing people to come in and participate in art making, as well as to have the artists from the schools, their work on exhibit. So it was making it sort of like a really kind of warm, inviting space and allowing people to join in. So you could go to the next slide. And it was something new that we hadn't done before. So we'll go to the next slide. The other project that I was involved in is we have a Picasso collection. And so one of the works that I was working on, it was called Functional Picasso, and it was looking at the ceramics of Picasso and his collaborators. So looking at how he worked with the Moderator studio to develop these ceramics that were in editions, and that led into the next project that is currently on view, and it's Picasso Ceramics Studio. So that again is a participatory exhibition where instead of having Picasso on the works on these high plinths with sort of like an element of prestige, that we've lowered the tables and you could sit with the artworks and actually make some little sculptures or do some sketching right in the exhibition space. So I'm really excited about the direction that the museum is going in, and my background is I've been sort of worked in a nonprofit working with underserved youth, and then in a commercial gallery context, and I'm really interested in socially engaged art and underserved artists and community engagement. So happy to be here. We'll pass it over to Claudia.
Hello, everyone. I'm Claudia Preza, the assistant curator at the El Paso Museum of Art. So far, it's going to be 2 years that I've been in this institution, but I've been working in exhibition development in various capacities for the last 10 years or so. Next slide. So part of my work, not just on my current institution, but overall in my curatorial focus, is to kind of represent identity and this counter hegemonic initiatives that kind of focus on narratives that have not been the traditional focus in the art historical canon. So I do a lot of exhibitions that are traveling, such as this one, There's a Woman in Every Color, Black Women in Art, organized initially by the Borden College Museum of Art. Next slide. I also do a lot of organizing from local artists from the community, such as this exhibition called Isadora Stowe Illuminated. My main focus has always been, whether with my institution or my own personal curatorial projects, is the representation of women, Latina identifying individuals, as well as the LGBTQIA community. Next slide. For this presentation, I do want to kind of focus and bring some of my own perspective working in this project that has been it's been a work in progress ever since I started at my institution, and it's the Border Biennial, the Bienal Fronteriza of 2024. So this project it is a call for art and working with other two curatorial advisors into making a selection of artists to really represent the theme of identity within the border.
So those were some pretty good, robust intros. And I know we touched on this a little bit, but I still thought I would kick us off by asking us all to talk about why we're in this, why we do what we do, what drives us intellectually, personally, professionally in these roles. Yeah, just what are we after? What are we up to?
I think the thing that's really nice and that's connected all of us is that we're really, from our conversations that we had, is that we're all really interested in how curating can be this kind of platform for celebrating and uplifting and telling stories that have otherwise been either forgotten, willfully buried, whatever reason it might be. I think for me, being a curator has an enormous amount of power attached to it, and it's really important to me that we use that in a way that is kind of helping to celebrate and bring to attention artists and creatives and other people who have been, I thought you put it really well, Brittany, in your introduction, almost like written out of art history. And I think for me that it's almost like a kind of an activist kind of moment. And I've got this amazing book, which I'm sure some of you know, which is called Curatorial Activism by Maura Riley. And that's something that I come back to time and time again with a lot of my work, is how we think of an ethics of curating and how we kind of put that at the heart of what we do, I suppose.
I want to go ahead and echo kind of what Charlotte mentioned. And one of the main reasons also that I curate is not only for representation with the exhibitions that I do, but also within the field. As a daughter of Mexican immigrants, I did not grow up going to museums or even knowing what a curator did. So in my community, I want to be kind of that example for other younger Latina identifying women to see someone that they can aspire to be to, or know that, yes, there's representation not only in the galleries, but also behind the scenes.
Yeah, and I think having your curatorial practice align with your passion and your, your values for what kinds of stories need to be told in the narratives, and the understanding of how those certain voices are so prominent, and what goes into supporting those who maybe don't have the resources or the economic support in the past to be able to be at a level where they're exhibition ready. And so really engaging with those communities and being able to then have ideas brought into the forefront. It is, echo Charlotte in that, it feels like a really amazing responsibility to be able to be part of the decision-making process in what stories are told, what exhibitions come to the fruition, and if we're doing 11 or 12 exhibitions a year, how those decisions are made, and to be part of that is like a really valued thing and I'm happy to be part of it.
Yeah, and I was hoping that we could all talk a bit about logistical challenges. I mean, I think that we're all in different geographic locations. We're all in different kinds of institutions, different sizes. There's sort of various challenges around the resources of time and money, resources of content. What archives you have access to, what kind of research you need to do, what kind of research time is available to you in preparation for an exhibition. So could we dive into just what are some of those challenges for each of us in our different locations?
Sure, I can maybe jump in on that. Just thinking about how selecting regional artists may have the idea that those projects may be economically more sustainable. They're not going to have the costs associated with an international artist as far as travel and shipping and that type of thing. But sometimes when there's exhibitions or artists that we're working with that require like there isn't as much information about the histories that you're uncovering. It requires a lot more time and therefore energy is put into it. And so the cost value of resource, yeah, it's a higher, maybe something that's unexpected and something that's not written into budget lines, but very, very valuable. So that's one of the challenges.
Kind of adding what Bevin is speaking about, I do want to kind of touch on base on the hidden costs that as a curator, you kind of start with this project and you might have your budget ready, but then costs kind of pop up out of nowhere. Not only related to location, maybe you're working with a collection that you thought was in this place, but it's not. Also, being from El Paso, Texas, a lot of people think we're close to Texas, but we're actually really closer to other New Mexico and even Mexico, since I think the closest Texas city, a big city, it's quite a drive, I believe 4 to 5 hour drive. When getting to New Mexico, it's just 1 hour. So there's the logistics of hidden costs that just can pop up just based on location, but also anything that maybe while you're planning you didn't think of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a big thing that's affecting all of us across the industry is funding and income streams. And you know, Brittany and I touched on this when Brittany was in London over the weekend a little bit. You know, curators working in and also doing fundraising simultaneously and trying to bring together all of these resources to make these projects happen, which I think when you're thinking about hidden costs, for example, if you're curating an exhibition of an artist and it's the first time this has happened, Brittany, you can speak a bit more about the John Rhoden project. It takes a really long time because you're also having to bring together a list of works and, you know, it's not been done before by anybody else. So I think a hidden kind of cost is associated with that time involved with that kind of cataloguing and documentation. And then the fact that you might be making these budgets, you know, a few years in advance, and then it's actually a very different kind of landscape by the time you're going to open your show. And I think that from the Hayward's perspective, working with different galleries, you're always working with a very different team in each place. And sometimes you're working with a really small organization. You know, we have exhibitions that go to community centers and libraries. And then we also have exhibitions that go to kind of larger regional galleries. So you never kind of know who you're working with. And that's really great and super exciting. And it's really flexing all the time. But yeah, I'd say that's a big unknown from the kind of traveling exhibition front.
Yeah, and I would thank you, Charlotte. We did have a nice conversation in person about how, you know, one of the things that it's easy not to know at the start of a project is just what the logistics of sort of time, money, content, how that will all work together. And I will say that one of the pleasures of working on a project on an artist who's relatively whose reputation is relatively unconsolidated in art history meant that gathering a lot of information that, thank God, was still in existence, because, you know, when you're working with materials for an artist like John, who has passed away in 2001, his wife passed away a decade later, they had no children, there was no organized estate or archive. It meant that telling the story meant first finding the materials that were available to be processed as an archive, which is step one to, you know, figuring out how to tell a story comprehensively to do things that, like, how do you write an object label? How do you write a text panel in a gallery? How are you narratively framing this work? And that's a kind of thing that is very time consuming. I think Charlotte and I talked a bit about, as you start digging away at a project like this, and you discover that your sense of the resources that you will need change as you're working on it. It requires you to be sort of flexible and pivot. You get to a point where you look at the resources that you have and you realize, oh, it's time to re-strategize. I thought that this would be 18 months. It turns out it's looking like it's closer to 24 to 36 months. We need to change the timeline, or we have to figure out how to get more resources in place. If we need more money or more people, now we need to start thinking about what grant writing might need to be doing to support this project, to make sure that we are able to pull it off with the vision that we ended up with. And so I thought it'd be great to just hear all of you talk about how you navigate all of these strategies. What do you do when you run up against a barrier around not enough time, or not enough funding, or not enough people, or other kinds of challenges around, dead ends. Sometimes you go into an archive looking for information and it turns out not to be there, and you're sort of back to square one. This is the unglamorous bit of sleuthing and hitting hurdles. How are we scaling these?
I think for me, I think a lot about the curatorial process being very similar. It's such a creative process, and I have a background as a painter. And so the idea, the creation, the idea development, the not knowing when the ideas are going to happen, not knowing when things are going to be finalized, not having a control over those aspects of the programming is very much like similar to art making, and the ability to sort of pivot and work in different ways. So if it requires, at the end of the day, I'm working at a nonprofit, but the institution itself has all these procedures and requirements of a large organization that take the day-to-day, take a lot of time with the day-to-day. So I think being able to jump into grant writing, or being able to be resourceful and call on contacts and colleagues to be able to collaborate and share resources. Those are all I guess avenues for trying to persevere and work towards a goal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it's always just be really, really flexible. I feel like, the really unglamorous side of it is that you never really know what's around the corner, and you can plan and plan and plan. And I'm sure that all of us, love a spreadsheet and a list as much as the next person. But, at the end of the day, these things quite often will just go out of the window. And I think you have to be understanding that sometimes that will happen. I think like when I was in my first job, I was a bit like, the schedule is kind of exactly what's going to happen. And then there was a massive hurdle, something to do with, I think, the build for an exhibition running really late. And then all of the resulting schedules got pushed back. And it was a bit of a shock to the system, because I was working with everyone who's so unbelievably organized. And I thought, well, therefore, it's just going to go like that. But it doesn't. And that was the best possible lesson for me, I think. And it was learning that actually you can't guarantee anything, and it might all change at the drop of a hat, and that's okay. And that's happened before. And I think surrounding yourself with like-minded people who are willing to be flexible is really important.
Yeah, I think I agree with Charlotte. You can plan as much as you want, but there's always something that's gonna happen, or you don't even think something was happening. I know in a previous project, everything was going to plan. And then for the shipping of an artwork, I guess the shipping truck got a flat tire. So we had to, in the middle of the night, figure out how we were getting this artwork to the gallery and just kind of organizing it. We got it done, but it's just a lot of, you just have to stay flexible and just be prepared for the unexpected and any surprises that may have. But I think that's kind of the beauty of curating, because you never know. you don't get bored because you don't know what to expect. You can plan, there's always surprises, and you're always learning and constantly developing as a curator, just from experiences.
Yeah, I sort of appreciate us sort of calling to attention I feel like there's a kind of circuit of curatorial brain trusts or curatorial favors. I don't know if you all have networks that you mobilize, if there's I know I'm in several group chats with colleagues, email chains that sort of go on and on and on that I, if anything, would label them just generally troubleshooting. I think that one of the things that I really appreciate about us as arts workers, as collegial professionals, and also as people who get to participate with organizations like AAMC, is that you really are able to run into a problem and tap into a network, knowing somebody has confronted this challenge before. There must be somebody who knows what to do in this situation. And when we talk about, the challenges that we run into, I'm thinking about, working on an exhibition like the one that just opened here at PAFA. We had a moment where we had commissioned some new sculpture photography for the exhibition catalog. And inevitably, as always happens in the midst of major projects, you have a building failure. The freight elevator one day wasn't working. There's a way that these are the kinds of things that blow out your timelines and your expectations. And one of the things I think about throwing off timelines and calendars that's really challenging for us, and we've talked about behind the scenes, is pace. I know that in preparation, for this webinar and in so many of our projects, we've had a lot of conversations about the pace of our work. And I thought that it might be nice for us to get into that a little bit, but also just in the sense of the lay of the land, for each of us, about how many curators are at your institution. Are you teams of 1 or are you teams of 12? How many projects do you typically do a year? And how does that impact the work that you're able to do, or the work that you sometimes have to turn down, even though you would love to do it, that just exceeds your capacity?
Yeah, I think I just want to say thank you for kind of acknowledging that, sometimes you do have to turn things down, and that doesn't feel good. And that is a particularly unglamorous side of curating, is that there might be, some of these passion projects that you just aren't able to give the full attention that you need to. And I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge, that I think we all come across all the time. And, we talk about best practice, and that's so important. And you want to do what you're doing really, really well. And sometimes that means having to kind of funnel all of your energy into one thing. And that does feel really hard. So I agree with you there. It's a bit, I guess I kind of gestured towards it earlier, because although Hayward Gallery Touring is based in London, it's a very small team. There's 3 assistant curators, 1 senior curator. And that's because we work with different institutions and kind of almost like merge our teams each time. So as I said, depending on the team in each venue, it will expand or contract. So it really is a case-by-case basis. And we would typically try and work on about 3 touring exhibitions, 2 to 3 opening each year. So it's a very ambitious program for quite a small team. But I think the great thing about that is that because you're always pairing with different institutions, you kind of have this sort of swelling influx of people each time you initiate a project with a different place. And it's a lot of people to get to know and lots of names to remember, and you get there in the end. But yeah, that for me is quite challenging, but also really generative, because you're kind of, and you also get a big energy injection. Because I think, thinking about pace, when you're kind of coming up to like when you're installing, or you're the last week of the install, and you're just a bit exhausted, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, am I even going to be awake by the time this exhibition opens? And it's quite nice to be around different, I think having a team around you to kind of boost one another across all elements, whether it's energy or just kind of, someone giving you a hug when it's a really bad day, or the schedule's gone out of the window. I say, like, having great colleagues around you, both kind of in your immediate team, but also this big network that we're building together is super important.
Yeah, I agree. I think that working with other, institutions and organizations and being able to work together really helps designate resources and be able to build like a community. I also wonder about saying no to projects, but putting how an institution and how curators support artists in those early development phases, and how what as an institution we could do to allow more people into conversations. So yeah, there's when you see established artists with studios and production facilities and the ability to manage multiple projects and self-fund projects, they're at levels that allow them to sort of play in this field. But how do we work either with other organizations to develop and support people that need that support all the way along, so that they can be exhibition ready and to be at a spot where their voices can be heard. I know that we can't, as curators and institutions, do everything, but it is something to keep in mind as far as what that support could look like, or down the road, and thinking like far down the road, so that in 10 years maybe there's so many of those unheard voices that are now ready to be told those stories.
And Bevin, if you don't mind my asking, how big is your team? How are you on a large team, on a large curatorial team, or is it just you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there are 4 of us. There's Michelle Jake, she's chief curator, Troy Grunsell, performance and public practice, and Terra Hogue, she's specializing in Indigenous exhibitions, and then myself, as well as the CEOs also do some curating. So it's a small team with a lot of, we have a really strong a relationship, and I think like a really good ability to have varied perspectives on what should be shown, with still having an ability to work together. So it's a really great team in that way. But yeah, to recognize that we can't do everything is good also.
This is my turn. So for my institution, currently there's only one curator, and that's myself. So I do kind of try to balance our rotating exhibition schedules. We do have 3 galleries that rotate between 9 to 12 times a year, but also our permanent collection galleries, which can have change outs depending on the conservation schedule. So it's kind of that balance of trying to see which I don't want to say prioritizing any other project, because I believe every project should be treated equally, but sometimes it's just one of those that you can't have that ideal approach, even if you want to. You do have to prioritize a bigger exhibitions or something that's traveling or you're organizing. So it's kind of that challenge. I know my current institution is looking to grow the curatorial team and kind of continue doing what we do, but also kind of getting that assistance that is needed to just continue balancing and doing a proper, I wouldn't say proper, but more like putting the right resources for an exhibition. So the right time and dedication is put in without having to kind of sacrifice along the way just based on timeline or just resources, which can be people, time, money.
Yeah, I appreciate this conversation. I think that there's a lot of conversation in our field about gatekeeping, and I don't think we talk enough about institutional capacity, that the specificity of our organizations is so key to understanding the work that we do or don't do, and how hard it is to not be able to do everything that we want or have to turn down a project, even though it's a really great project, it's incredibly worthy. You think you could serve community or your audiences really well and serve the field really well. But you have a deep respect for what's possible for different kinds of exhibition projects or curatorial projects, and you understand that you don't quite have a resource match. I often talk about the work we do in terms of matchmaking, that you really need the right project at the right institution at the right time, with a robust system of resources to support it, because none of us finds it satisfying to do work that we'd like to sort of knock out of the park, and not really sort of have it, do what we want it to do. And that I think is really invisible, I think, to a lot of our audiences and our peers. I would love to know, we've got some great questions coming in, so I'll just ask one more question. As we're thinking about the work we do, both glamorous or unglamorous, where do writing and publications fit in here? Because I think that while we all sort of love a big hardcover coffee table exhibition catalog with, amazing scholarly essays that are just paradigm shifting, and glamorous, glorious photography on that great thick paper. The process of putting together a publication, working on a publication, or even an article or a review, if we have arts writing practices, is deeply unglamorous. And so how does that fit into our overall curatorial practices and how we think about how our work could impact the field, both in and beyond our exhibitions?
I think that's such a good question, and it's something I'm thinking about a lot about now, because I've actually left my curating job and I've started working as a senior editor at Phaidon. So I've kind of moved over from curating, where I would make a book alongside an exhibition, to kind of focusing wholly on a book. And for me, these things have actually always been kind of interchangeable. So there's a really lovely quote from T, the photographer I'm working on the book about, where she calls books galleries with paper walls. And I really liked this idea that a book can be an exhibition that travels far beyond the walls of an institution. And that for me has really been one of the kind of most galvanizing forces behind art writing for me. It's something as well I'm going to mention is that, like, when you're curating, you have several different bits of brains that, you've got your kind of very logistical, practical, problem-solving brain. You might have your budget brain. You might have your art writing research brain. You're kind of doing so many different things all at once. And I think having these different hats on, for me, it always made the process better, and being able to kind of speak across these different elements. Although I wish I did have 4 brains, I only do have 1. But yeah, I mean, like, art writing and making publications is an enormous undertaking. And I think, Brittany, you and I were chatting a bit about this when you were working on your Rhoden book, the proofreading and the copy editing and the checking for the missing comma, and this bit of the title's unitalicized, and it's a nightmare. And you go kind of like micro sort of, I can't even, it's like having a magnifying glass on everything. So I guess you're kind of shifting between the micro and the macro, like around art writing. And that's an amazing part of the process. But for me, that's one of the most time consuming things. And I think when we're thinking about how we juggle making the show or making the book or doing the public program and working with different groups and things like that, you've really got to think about how much headspace you can dedicate to all of those different things. And that's, again, a really hard decision, where ideally the schedule would come in and show that you've got, a couple of months where you can really focus on the book, and then you can really devote yourself to the show. But that doesn't always happen. So again, I go back to flexibility, but for me, that's one of the biggest challenges, is juggling that kind of really focused work where you've got to sit at a computer with kind of being out in the gallery and working with big teams of people, if that makes sense.
I think another challenge that for me when it comes to any type of art writing is just being with the content so much that everything just starts kind of blending in. So I think I'm writing great writing, but it's always hard to stepping back and then coming back to what you wrote and looking like, oh, I need to redo this because it doesn't make sense, because you're just kind of your brain is kind of just stuck on like, oh yes, this makes sense. I've been looking at this research material for like days on end and it's all perfectly clear. So I think not just the schedule of the production is actually like taking the time to give yourself breaks to go back to your writing, to just so you're not too bogged down with just one theme that you just kind of stuck with. So for me, that's the challenge for me when it comes to writing, just kind of seeing the same text over and over or the same ideas and not knowing how it's gonna end, kind of.
Yeah, I love the legacy of a book and the tangible, how being able to hold it in your hands and have it last on a shelf and be a standing resource, and sort of like the legitimacy of the words printed on paper. I love that aspect of it, and in terms of telling those stories that haven't been told, like to have a publication is really important. The thing that I think about is the sustainability and the resources required for then promoting the publication once it's produced, and the horrifying idea of publication sitting in back hallways not being sent out. So I think that the entire process has to be very well thought through to the very last catalog or publication that's out the door, and being able to make sure that those publications will be in the hands of people and not unused. So we had in 2018 to 2020, we had an editor and publications coordinator, but we don't currently have the staff member that's designated as such. So it really contributes to how those, unless we had another party that was designated to promote the publication. We do sell publications through our art and design store, but then it's, I guess, then the appetite for and the population, how many of the 350,000 people that live here are going to be purchasing a coffee or a book that they're going to have on their coffee table, or as a resource for future. So those are all the considerations and challenges, I guess, that I think about with publications.
Yeah, I really, I appreciate this. I think that I sort of share all of your feelings, challenges. I'm also in an institution that doesn't have a designated publication arm, and it's incredibly challenging. There are so many projects that go up that visitors will ask, why isn't there a book for this? And sometimes that's the answer. It does mean that you have to plan what the publication priorities will be when you're doing exhibition projects, which is really hard. I know we've all had the experience of reading a book, whether it was an exhibition catalog, an article in a journal, an article in a magazine, some kind of publication where we finished it and thought, oh, thank God somebody wrote this, that I actually am a different thinker now. I'm a different arts worker now as a result of having read this project. And I'm so grateful that that a team of someone's took the time and the effort to create this publication. We're getting some really fantastic questions that I want to throw out to us. We have an attendee that asks, how do you advocate for artists and exhibitions within your institution? And how do you balance the importance of an exhibition with lack of enthusiasm or hesitancy from leadership, which is such a big question. And I think we talk so much about when we run into each other in the field.
Yeah, I think for me, it's trying to think of that advocacy as similar to promotion and grant writing, or involving those threads of information that appeal to aspects. So being able to make ties with our collection is a good touch point. Being able to make ties with our community, being from my community, having grown up in here, and also a town not far away, is a nice resource to fall back on, because I feel as though I've been know sort of the histories that I was part of, and so that's nice to and the current focus of the institution is to have that rooted in place, like have connections to community. So those would all be areas that I would use to make connections for an artist that I wanted to promote. Yeah.
I think it's also important to keep in mind that even if you don't get support of the first try, to keep trying, just kind of start, I wouldn't say start big, but start the constant, like, let's do this project focusing on this artist. And if it gets to kind of like, how about this artist? Just the continuous kind of presentation and bringing up the subject will eventually lead to be like, okay, yes, do that project. So I think it's the continuous work to try to create advocacy for artists or a specific group that you're trying to bring the narrative into your institution. So for me, just keeping that constant talk about a certain topic will eventually lead to somewhere.
I think that's a really great thing to flag, Claudia, try and try again. And I think, in order to do that, you have to have a degree of resilience and understand that, sometimes you are knocked back and that feels really horrible. But I think resilience and research as well. So, like thinking about so if you're really passionate about a project and you really want to kind of flag its importance to your leadership and whatever that might look like. And I think just being able to say why it's important, what kind of gap is it plugging, what is it offering to people, and thinking about how it appeals to kind of the broadest kind of group of people. And sort of, I think thinking about the reception of it, or, it's weird to think about the reception of an idea before it's even been agreed that you can do the idea, but, you want to be saying, this is going to make a really significant difference. So I think, yeah, you've got to be, a cheerleader with a lot of grit.
Yeah, and I would say I find that targeted advocacy is really important also, because there's a lot of, I think we all experience this, that there's a lot of work that we do within our institutions, but there's a lot of work that we do that looks like advocacy that is beyond our institutions. Sometimes the advocacy you want to do is for an artist or for a project can show up in other ways. It's not necessarily, sitting in your staff meetings saying we definitely need to do this exhibition. Sometimes it's advocacy in the kinds of grants that you're writing, and I think that also can sometimes get you over the enthusiasm hump. It's very easy sometimes to need to go another way and say, okay, I know that there are particular funders that are excited about this project, or I know there's a particular community that'll be excited about this project. I've seen and talked with other curators who have done, public programming around a particular idea or a project and really done the work to get a kind of groundswell, an audience that says, oh, this should really be an exhibition. And that's a great way to get a project sort of pushed going, to convince people, there's an audience for this. And then I think we all do all kinds of service work where we serve on granting committees or scholarship committees or, service fellowship committees, hiring committees, where we do advocacy in all of these other ways. And I would say I feel like every curator I know has been carrying around a project that they're just like waiting for the right moment and the right institution to do for years. And I've talked to curators at opening receptions for exhibitions and had the conversation with someone that's like, I've been wanting to do this for 15 years. And it needed the right place or the right time for this project to actually happen. And so some of that that flexibility is important. Patience is also important. It's really unsexy to sort of say, I worked at 3 institutions before I was at the right place to pitch this successfully. But I know we do that sometimes as well. We've also got a great question, sort of in the similar vein of exhibitions, institutions and audiences, that I think it would be great to think with. What role does the local school system play in regards to the exhibitions that you host at your institution? And with the rise of censorship and amended history within school curriculums across the US, have you faced any pushback for an exhibition's content? I know we're not all based in the United States, but I do think that it's a question that's relevant to all of our practices. How close are we tied to our local school systems, and how much does censorship and curriculum impact the work that we're seeing on the walls of our galleries?
I guess I'll start this question. So I am based in Texas. So as we know, that's a bit more conservative state. I do work at a municipal institution, but we do follow the city rather than mainly the state ideals, and it hasn't really affected the exhibition, surprisingly. As I mentioned, I do kind of focus in that kind of inclusivity and representation in the galleries, and I've been able to do that. I do know that there's been school groups that have asked to not go through a certain exhibition based on the content that it has, but that's mainly been it. I think I'm just going to continue doing my work unless someone higher up decides that it should be. I do have my background in art censorship, and as an individual, I believe that we shouldn't be censoring any exhibitions. I do all my work that I do that I see a potential kind of controversy. I do prepare enough and kind of prepare my team and the rest of the staff members, like in case this happens, let's be prepared and kind of defend the work and respect the artist and the narrative of the exhibition. So it does have I would say schools does have an impact, but we also have other exhibitions to offer within my institution that it could be easily like, well, if you don't want to see this content, we do have this other great artwork that you can come see. So.
Yeah, I think a lot about warnings, viewing warnings outside exhibition doors, and whether those are negatively impacting visitors and that they're then not going into the exhibition space because they might be interpreting it as mature content, but it's maybe a nude that their child would be fine viewing. And I know with the school groups that we have, we always suggest that teachers come through and view the exhibition before they bring their students, and we're definitely not selecting exhibitions or programming exhibitions around what can be seen in schools. But also if a teacher is really, forward thinking and creative about their curriculum, they can use it to their advantage. Like we have a Laura Prevost exhibition that moves you through these curtains back into a womb-like setting. And so there's a teacher in one of the schools that does some of her sex education where people are enacting parts of the female anatomy. And so she's really like thinking creatively about how she can bring her classroom into to view this exhibition. So I'm really happy to see those kinds of measures that teachers are making, as opposed to like some of the legislation that is being worked around with the province right now about not allowing second or third party educators to come in and teach sex education. So yeah, there's some exciting things that I've seen through our exhibition.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Because with the touring exhibitions, we would completely defer to the teams that we work with in the different places because they know their audiences. I can't be sitting in a gallery in London talking about kind of what the local community's like, whether we're working in Sheffield or Bristol or wherever that might be. So we would work. I think the key to that was always collaboration and kind of understanding and acknowledging what the audiences around the place need. So kind of rooting it very much in place, like we've talked a bit about earlier. But I'd say in my previous role, we used to work really, really collaboratively with our creative learning department to think about different ways in which we could invite different groups, whether it's, kind of young children up to people who are in college or universities, different kind of targeted activities. And we would do things like, for example, I worked on an exhibition about Lee Krasner, and we made this really beautiful handout, which was kind of visitors would be able to take if they had young children, and then it was kind of a fold out handout and people would be able to spot certain things in certain galleries. And I think it was just kind of being open and flexible and thinking about there's different hooks in all of the in the exhibition that will appeal to different people, and just kind of using the artwork actually to lead the way a little bit there.
Yeah, I think there's something incredibly powerful about just the flexibility of multiple on-ramps into a subject or a topic or an artwork. And I also, I want to be mindful of time, so I want to wrap us up. I want to close out by acknowledging that I think that there's something about the facticity of objects and the allure of art in particular that makes exhibitions such a great form of knowledge production and world sense making that I think we're incredibly lucky to participate in, especially in this moment where a lot of us are thinking about, the history of knowledge production, what we think we know and what we think we can know, especially sometimes when we're working either in concert with or against particular kind of curriculum or censorship. I think arts and artifacts and, research are incredibly powerful tools in our arsenal in this particular moment in history. And I hope we're all using them well and responsibly. We're coming to the end of our webinar. And so I just want to thank Emma and the AAMC and also just throw it back to you to close us out.
Thank you, Brittany. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Emma Hunick. I'm the Fellowship Program Manager at AAMC Foundation. I really want to just sincerely thank the fellows of our engagement program for international curators who moderated and were the panelists of this webinar today. Brittany, Bevin, Claudia, Charlotte, just thank you. A lot of work went on behind the scenes to present this webinar, and I'm so grateful. And it's really just been such a pleasure working with all of you. I would also like to extend a really big thank you to the Terra Foundation for American Art, who funded this program, and we would not be here without them. So we are just eternally grateful. And of course, thank you to all of our attendees today, everyone who registered, whether you are here right now or couldn't make it, will receive a link to the recording of this, and it'll be posted on our YouTube channel soon if you'd like to revisit it or share it with colleagues. And then also keep an eye on AAMC's website for some exciting upcoming programming. We have a really great webinar scheduled for the end of November. And that's about it. I really thank you for putting this together and joining us today. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. We're just very thankful that you were able to join us.